In Tijuana, small children were among a group of Central American migrants who crawled through a hole under a border fence. Some of them told reporters that they were too exhausted to stay in shelters on the Mexican side. They said that they intended to surrender themselves immediately to Border Patrol to apply for asylum. President Trump tried to make it harder to get asylum, but last month a federal court placed a temporary restraining order on his policy that only permitted asylum claims made at official ports of entry.
New at 5, relief surprise delivered today in Eagle Pass for migrants arriving at the border at Piedras Negras. Members of the Hill Country District of the United Methodist Church collected warm clothing, blankets, and bedding, enough to fill a van and a trailer. Organizers say even more help now on the way. It's all in response to a plea from the United Methodist Church in Mexico. They say, for the most part, asylum seekers that were waiting on the Mexican side of the international bridge and in shelters have left just in time.
And it's not going to stop. We understand there are 600 or 700 more that will be here within a week or two. And so it's only going to get worse.
Still in the works, a support system for the asylum seekers who have been processed and released pending their court hearing.
Migrants often wait weeks or even months south of the border to have U.S. immigration officers hear their case.
It's happening near Eagle Pass, where migrant families are still streaming into shelters there, which are already over capacity. The crowded conditions force people often to sleep on the streets and even, in some cases, on the ports.
Our border reporter, Oscar Margain, takes us inside their struggle.
¿De dónde es usted? De Honduras.
Yosari Carolina and her 2-month-old daughter have found refuge at this shelter in Piedras Negras, Mexico, to shield themselves from the cold weather. In this video recording, the Honduran mother explains how she migrated for 2 months while pregnant to reach the U.S.-Mexico border. Yosari says she gave birth shortly after arriving to Piedras Negras, before she was physically able to walk to the Eagle Pass International Bridge in near freezing temperatures over the weekend to seek asylum.
We have a group of migrants in the streets, living in the street.
Methodist Pastor Roberto Gomez recorded the testimony on his phone. He wants the world to see what's happening in Piedras Negras. With all 4 shelters there over capacity, many migrants turn to the bridge in a desperate attempt to get ahead of a long queue of asylum seekers.
Kids, women, and it's no good place to stay in the night.
In true Southern fashion, a network of Methodist churches in Central Texas responded to the call with a warm embrace, driving more than 200 miles to the border with loads and loads of donations.
This time of the year in the cold, all these blankets, coats, amazing.
This is just the start of it, but we have $1,350. The governments get to deal with the immigration policies, but what we see is that people are in need, they can't stay where they're at, it's not safe, and we don't want to see people suffering. So you get...
Thank you.
In the next few days, volunteers are going to sort through all the coats and blankets and coordinate with Pastor Gomez to make sure they get to people like Yosari. In the meantime, the Methodist Church plans to deliver a second round of donations by next week. They say that's when another wave of 300 to 400 migrants are going to be arriving to the border. In Eagle Pass, I'm Oscar Margain reporting.
The number of migrant families apprehended at the U.S.-Mexico border hit a record high for the 4th straight month. More than 25,000 families were detained in November for illegally crossing from Mexico. Families made up nearly half of all apprehensions at the border.
Only on 12 News, we're counting down the top 18 stories of 2018.
At number 16, the border crisis igniting a huge debate across the country as immigrant families were torn apart. Tonight, we're taking a look back.
Previous administrations had allowed children and parents to remain together, even integrate into the community while their immigration cases were playing out, right? Well, the problem was a lot of them would fall off the radar. They wouldn't show up to court.
We are sick and tired of seeing little children, seeing little babies taken from their mothers.
It's not right. It's immoral. if I put my kids in a cage, the government would take them away, but yet we have the government taking away kids and putting them in cages.
If you're really, really pathetically weak, the country's going to be overrun with millions of people. And if you're strong, then you don't have any heart. That's a tough dilemma.
So here's the Trump administration saying no more. We're going to prosecute the parents as criminals, keep them separated from kids, both remain detained, and then we just saw these protests erupt around the country.
Let the children go!
Right? You had a clash between two philosophies, what's considered humane versus what's necessary to slow down the flow of immigrants at the border.
The new policy had Arizona's leaders speaking out.
It is destroying our whole idea of what it means to be a moral American.
It is abhorrent to separate moms from their kids.
June 20th, in a stunning move, with a stroke of a pen, President Trump stopped the separation of children and parents, with his executive order essentially reversing his administration's position.
So that's where we are today. There's no longer this zero tolerance policy. The vast majority of these families have been reunited, but there are still some separations happening. Now, the Trump administration says that is not the result of the zero tolerance policy. So there are still some questions about just what's taking place.
Read on this from a guy who has a vested interest in this. I'm talking about Texas Congressman Michael Burgess. He joins us right now. Congressman, I know the Democratic leaders are meeting with the president tomorrow. They're hell-bent on saying, look, the $1.6 billion you got, Mr. President, for the wall is all you're going to get. I know you and your colleagues are looking, as is the president, for something closer to $5 billion. Where's this going to go?
Well, the president has identified the $5 billion figure as the dollar amount he needs to defend the southern border, and my opinion is he needs to get the money that he has requested. I know this is going to be a difficult fight, but I think the president would be correct in vetoing any bill that we send him that does not provide him the dollar figure he needs for us to provide defense for the southern border.
Do you think that John Kelly is going to be out of a job soon because he was trying to interpret what the president said earlier on, that it wasn't a full wall, the entire, border with Mexico, that the president was angered by that because he seems to want that wall come, hell or high water?
Yeah, and he's correct in wanting that wall. So, no, I can't speculate as to what or interpret what General Kelly may have meant or inferred. He's knowledgeable about the issue. He was the former Secretary of Department of Homeland Security, so certainly he has been to the border. Secretary Kelly has seen this firsthand. He knows what's at stake. And the images you just portrayed of people literally just melting through the fence as it exists today, that's why the president needs the defensive barrier of a wall, and he should get that.
Your colleague, Mark Meadows, is among those being bandied about as a possible replacement for General Kelly as chief of staff. What do you think of that? He has some very tough views on that wall that kind of mirror your own.
Well, I would not pretend to give the president advice for his chief of staff. The chief of staff position is extremely important, and I want the president to have a good one.
So do you like Congressman Meadows?
I think the president has a number of people that he's choosing from, and I'll leave that decision to the president.
Well put, sir. Let me ask you a little bit about where this $5 billion would come from. In other words, if the president were to get his way on this, and you obviously get your preference on this, where would you take it from? In other words,
well, it would come in the monies that would be appropriated for the Department of Homeland Security. Remember, that was one of the appropriations bills that was not done in September. We did defense. We did a number of other appropriations bills, health and human services, but Department of Homeland Security was not done. It was a continuing resolution, or an IOU, written in September. Well, now that IOU has come due, and the monies would be appropriated out of those monies that were available for the Department of Homeland Security.
Congressman, you had mentioned about the number of illegals who have melted through that wall, so to speak, or in other words, snuck through fencing that's already there. That would seem to indicate that whatever we build, we replace fencing that's there now, and that makes me think that's going to be a lot more than $5 billion, right?
Well, $5 billion is the down payment on the $25 billion figure that the president has identified that he will need in order to provide the operational security.
But this is the
for
first
the southern
time,
border.
sir, I'm sorry I wasn't clear, that we had talked about replacing walls or parts of walls and or fences up now that are not adequate. And we've only recently discovered with the Caravan they might not be adequate. Right?
Correct. They might not be adequate, which is why the money put forward in 2006 for the Secure Fence Act, clearly that has not been satisfactory. That has not created the type of security that this country requires. And, you know, don't forget, Neil, that we are the most generous country on the face of the earth when it comes to bringing in people legally. 1.1 million people per year come in legally to this country. So that's something of which we should all be proud. So we're not talking about ending immigration. We're talking about providing border security for our citizens. It is the #1 pledge we make to defend our nation, and that's what we should be serious about.
No, you were quite accurate to mention, you know, legal immigration is at record levels, and it has been for the last few years. So it's a good distinction you made there. Congressman, thank you very, very much.
Great. Thank you.
A total of 12 separate drug busts by U.S. Border Patrol across the Rio Grande Valley, seizing nearly 2 tons of marijuana. It was a busy weekend for agents. In one of the busts on Friday, McAllen agents working near Mission spotted smugglers utilizing a raft to transport large bundles of marijuana. That same day, another group of drug smugglers caught, this time carrying the narcotics north of the Rio Grande. Over the 3-day period, RGV sector seized more than 1,900 pounds, worth more than $1.5 million.
Transnational criminal syndicates are playing an ever-increasing role in the influx of migrants from Central America into the U.S. That's according to CBP Commissioner Kevin McAleenan, who says human traffickers charge up to $7,000 to take migrants from Central America to the U.S. border and an additional $500 to get them into the U.S.
Actually being advertised by smugglers who start this at a retail level, almost like a travel agency in communities in Central America, saying if you bring a child with you, you will be released if you cross the border illegally and you'll be allowed to stay in the United States.
Criminal gangs appear to be profiteering off the influx of mass migration into the U.S. Officials say illicit schemes involve Central American human smuggling rings, Mexican cartels and U.S.-based entities as well. And the statement from Commissioner McAleenan appears to echo President Trump's concerns over rampant crime at the Mexican border, previously denounced by the mainstream media as not true.
In some cases, you know, they're not the parents. These are people, they call them grabbers. They grab a child because they think they're going to have a certain status by having a child. You know, you have certain advantages in terms of our crazy laws.
McAleenan also says criminal gangs are bringing drugs and weapons across the border, using migrant families with children as a cover. He added human smugglers stage mass crossings of the border by migrants to distract U.S. security personnel and then attempt to deliver their illicit cargo. The commissioner echoed previous remarks from Trump administration officials that illegal mass migration is not a victimless crime, as it comes with other types of criminal activities and puts the lives of migrants and border personnel at risk.
We know that organizers of the caravan have been pushing women and children and others to the front of the caravan in hope that law enforcement will not engage them. This is particularly dangerous given the unusual propensity for violence.
Meantime, the CBP commissioner says migrant families made up 59% of those actually detained while attempting to rush the border last month. He says illegal alien families are encouraged to cross into the US by smuggler advertising policies, intimidation, as well as the loopholes in America's immigration law.
So we've got these really vulnerable populations in the hands of violent criminals, and they're coming on a promise that they'll be allowed to stay in the US, when really only 10 to 20% have valid claims of protection and asylum once their immigration proceeding is completed.
While migrant caravans are still faltering at the border, both border security and the Trump administration are calling for legislative action to curb illegal mass migration. But whether a seemingly divided Congress will be able to come up with a practical plan for immigration reform remains to be seen. Christian Rose, One American News.
A federal appeals court blocks the Trump administration from enforcing its asylum order while the policy remains under consideration by the courts. Friday's ruling was issued by the Ninth Circuit, which has come under fire by President Trump in recent months for so-called judicial activism. That decision upholds a lower court's ruling from last month, which stopped authorities from withholding asylum from migrants who cross the border illegally. The DOJ has since slammed the ruling as absurd, arguing the asylum order is a well-reasoned exercise of the president's authority. What America's Luke Glaze has the latest on the border crisis.
Nonprofits in San Diego, California say they're struggling to accommodate hundreds of migrant families who have entered the city's streets. Reports Friday say the San Diego Rapid Response Network is calling for government assistance to fund a permanent shelter, saying around 1,700 migrants have gone through their facilities since October, and they can no longer handle them alone. This comes as more migrants become tired of the lengthy asylum process and the living conditions in Tijuana. The head of Mexico's Civil Protection Agency said this week they know of 1,000 migrants who have jumped the border fence in the past month. While Mexican authorities have taken great efforts to provide food and shelter for the Central American migrants, many of them say they'd rather cross illegally.
I'd say it's better not to wait. It's better to cross now. There's no denying it. It's better to try however you can.
Reports say many plan to turn themselves into Border Patrol as soon as they cross, because they know they will still be eligible to receive asylum. That's thanks to the Ninth Circuit Court in San Francisco, which blocked the president's executive order to strip that privilege away from illegal immigrants. Meantime, the Trump administration continues to advocate for strengthening border security in other ways. The president signed legislation Friday to extend the deadline for government funding for 2 more weeks, as he pushes House Democrats to approve the money needed to enhance Border Patrol and begin construction on the wall. Luke Glaze, One America News.
Around 3,000 active duty troops will leave the southern U.S. border by the holidays. U.S. officials say that will begin sometime this week. There have been around 5,400 active duty troops along the border in response to a caravan of Central American migrants moving toward the United States. The number of migrants has declined and the military has finished much of the wire barrier placement. So combat engineers and helicopter transport crews are not as needed, but many of the military police will remain.
An undocumented immigrant facing deportation has launched a campaign to stop other immigrants from stealing people's identities. Ingrid Encalada spoke out tonight at the church where she's taken refuge in Boulder. Melissa Garcia is live at that church tonight. And Melissa, today marked a 1-year anniversary.
The woman, Kathy, has been living here at this church for 365 days, and so far that has helped her to avoid deportation. But tonight she is speaking out, asking and urging others not to make the same mistake that she did. It's been 15 years since Ingrid Encalada bought a stolen Social Security number on the street. Governor Hickenlooper says the woman who it belonged to almost lost her government benefits.
Ingrid Encalada Latorre, we know you to be a good and worthy person.
Inside the Boulder church, where Encalada and 2 others hide from immigration enforcement, supporters gathered around the Peruvian immigrant Sunday at the launch of her campaign, No More Identity Theft.
The campaign, No More Identity Theft, will help others to not make the mistakes I made.
Through an interpreter, she says she stole the SSN in 2003 and used it for 7 years to put food on the table for her 2 children. She also says she didn't know it was stolen.
Really, I had no idea that number belonged to anyone, because often the people that you buy them from just make up the numbers.
Now she's educating other members of Colorado's immigrant community to try and prevent the same crime.
Well, this is remarkable. You've got somebody here who's saying, I want to own my crimes and make people understand that identity theft hurts people.
Hickenlooper denied Encalada's first request for a pardon in September of last year. Now, after this launch, she is asking for that same leniency. Live in Boulder, Melissa Garcia covering Colorado First.
All new on 12 News at 6, the Trump tweet patrol focused on Arizona tonight.
The commander-in-chief tweeting, Arizona, together with our military and border patrol, is bracing for a massive surge at a non-walled area. We will not let them through. Big danger. Nancy and Chuck must approve border security and the wall.
I'm Mike Gonzalez alongside Tram, Mai tonight. Caribe and Mark had the night off. So is that tweet completely true? Team 12's political insider Bram Resnick joining us live tonight. He's verifying that for us. Bram?
Yeah, the tweet came as a surprise to Governor Doug Ducey. He had no idea what the president was talking about. Neither did Border Patrol officials. We verified the most likely source for the president's tweet was a Fox Business Network broadcast. Arizona, together with our military and Border Patrol, is bracing for a massive surge at a non-walled area. We will not let them through. Big danger.
We're working with them right now to understand what the situation is there.
Arizona Governor Doug Ducey said Friday he had no idea what the president was talking about. It appears the president got his information from a Fox Business broadcast.
Amber, let me ask you about the concerns tonight there in Arizona.
We can verify the president posted his tweet about Arizona bracing for a massive surge 15 minutes after that Fox Business News broadcast Thursday night titled Arizona Braces for Caravan Surge. Trump echoed Fox Business host Trish Reagan's description of what the Border Patrol was doing.
Preparation drills to make sure that they can handle an onslaught of people stampeding the border.
Border Patrol agents and Army soldiers did hold training exercises this week at the Nogales port of entry. This Customs and Border Protection video is from October. It's not clear how the president came up with his claim that a surge will occur at a non-walled area. These are images of walls and fortifications at the Nogales port of entry. We can verify the Nogales crossing, the busiest port in Arizona, is flanked by walls for miles to the east and west. When I asked the Border Patrol spokesman if he knew what the president was talking about, he told me to ask the White House to explain that tweet. Live in the Alert Center, Bram Resnick, 12 News.
Here's the problem. You got the Democratic leader to be in the House calling border security a wall component immoral. If I'm President Trump Tuesday, I would tell Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer that we're going to build a wall where it makes sense. If I were the president, I would dig in and not give in on additional wall funding. I'd want the whole $5 billion because the Caravan is a game changer.
Senator Lindsey Graham offering President Trump some advice ahead of tomorrow's meeting with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer at the White House. Let's bring in Fox News senior Capitol Hill producer Chad Pergram. What do you think of that advice from Lindsey Graham? Is any portion of that possible?
Well, if Lindsey Graham, has President Trump's ear, and that's what President Trump does, there's going to be a partial government shutdown in about a week and a half here. The reason is that Democrats in the House of Representatives just won't abide any wall funding. I asked House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi on Thursday morning, I said, would you agree to some degree of wall funding if you were to get a DACA fix? And she said no. She said they're two separate subjects. Now, Senate Democrats seem to be a little more amenable to go along with this for some border wall funding. But again, here's the problem. They absolutely need Democrats in the House to pass a bill. The reason is that there was a bill on the floor in late June, two bills, in fact, that both failed that would have provided border wall funding. There is not the right mixture of votes in the House of Representatives on the Republican side to pass a bill with wall funding or without wall funding. So however this is going to be resolved, they have to have Democrats.
I'll tell you exactly how to resolve it. Because Washington is so stupid. You just take the word wall out. Everybody's for funding the border protection. You're looking at, $5 billion, that's less than, it's 1/10 of 1% of the budget. It is a tiny, tiny drop in the bucket. No one in Washington is afraid to spend money. It's insane.
Well, don't forget that Nancy Pelosi, don't forget that Nancy Pelosi has to show her bona fides to liberals so she has the votes to be speaker. And frankly, a little bit of a skirmish, one that's not too long with the president over wall funding probably helps her because then it shows her and allows her to flex her muscles to those liberal Democrats who are a little skittish about her being the speaker. But by the same token, she can't go for a government shutdown. That is, catastrophic for Democrats if they start the year with a government shutdown as soon as they get control of the House of Representatives.
Okay, so you've been around for a long time. Chuck and Nancy, they're a wily crew. They go over to the White House. They're wheeler dealers. The president's a wheeler dealer. Do they make some kind of a deal that maybe, like you said, they can't agree on something right now because she's still got to be speaker, but there's something more down the road? What comes of this meeting?
Well, sometimes you might hear something about infrastructure. You know, people forget that in September of last year, they went down to the White House and the president went over the heads of House Speaker Paul Ryan and the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and cut the deal with Pelosi and Schumer and not them. So, you know, this has been done before. It's been said, you know, that he sometimes likes just their personalities a little bit better. Dealing with Pelosi, Schumer's a fellow New Yorker. There's that back and forth, you know, Queens, Brooklyn thing. Yeah. Absolutely. But you know what's another factor that's emerging here? There's a lot of chatter on Capitol Hill this afternoon about Mark Meadows, the leader of the Freedom Caucus, and if he could be the White House chief of staff. And this might be an audition for Mark Meadows or anybody else that, for that matter, you know, who can kind of have the president's ear. Mark Meadows is well versed in the combat on the Republican and the conservative side of the aisle for those principles. And that could be a factor here as we approach that deadline a week from Friday, Melissa.
So that's interesting. So he's in there whispering in the president's ear about what he should do. And if there's something successful in there, then that makes him a chief of staff type person. He obviously wants that job. Lord only knows why. It looks very difficult. But Chad Pergram, thank you. Interesting stuff to chew on there. We'll keep an eye on it. Thank you.
U.S. officials say active duty troops will start leaving the southern U.S. border this week. The number of force is expected to go down to 3,000 by the holidays. This after President Trump ordered the deployment of more than 5,000 in response to a caravan of Central American migrants moving to the border. Border officials say as many as 1,000 migrants have hopped or skirted through fences since the caravan arrived to Tijuana last month. U.S. officials say they can only process a small number of migrants seeking asylum daily due to limited resources. One group, which included small children, had been caught crossing the border through a small hole under the fence.
At the top and all new this hour, a Valley police chief says 2 deaths in his city are too many.
Both victims were in the country illegally. Channel 5's Angela Vargas in our studio right now, and to tell us how officers process cases like this and why it's happening in that particular area. Angela?
One body found in the brush, another near a major roadway. Sullivan City investigators say they were able to identify the latest person from what the coroner found inside of a shoe. It's all happening near homes. Some families are extra cautious in Sullivan City. Tell me why we're talking to you through this fence.
Oh, here. We're speaking through the fence because of my dog. He really left over there. But I'm afraid we don't know what might happen. I mean, he doesn't know you. He knows me.
This is Esther Zambrano Flores' dog named Max.
Now give me your hand. Give me your hand. Sit and give me your hand. There you go.
Zambrano Flores says she experienced people crossing into her yard in the past. She got Max and the fence to stay protected. She heard about the 2 deaths this year.
It's kind of sad to hear those things that are happening here. I mean, I think it's getting worse and worse.
The city of Sullivan is so close to the border, maybe not even a mile away. It's just a very prominent area for border crossers to come into the United States soil illegally.
In August, we walked with Chief Ozuna where the recent skeletal remains were found. We learned they belonged to a 31-year-old man from El Salvador. He explains how the coroner identified him.
Sure. In the tennis shoe, you have your sole, and then you have your bottom lining. So basically, the sole was lifted up, and the ID card was in there, preserved with plastic around it.
In the Sullivan City Police Station, a Customs and Border Protection and Border Patrol highlights their most wanted suspects involved in human smuggling. 5 out of the 10 posted suspects have ties to committing crimes in Zone 6, which is part of Sullivan City.
Border Customs Protection are there to protect the citizens of the county and the United States, and we have our community to protect. So we're pretty much out there vigilant and trying to do the best that we can and patrolling with the limited resources we have for our community.
Zambrano Flores explains she will continue to stay alert too, with her fence and Max by her side. Chief Ozuna tells us in 2016 and 2017, officers only assisted Stark County authorities in finding human remains. This is the first time this year human remains were found in their city in the last 2 years. In the Channel 5 News studio, Angelo Vargas, Channel 5 News at 6.
We wanted to know more about Border Patrol's mission to stop human smuggling. This is a Channel 5 News Extra. Federal agents are using Se Busca Información, or seeking information. Authorities say it's an initiative to get the public more involved to identify known smugglers. The known suspects are posted on billboards and signs across the valley. Agents want the public to call 1-800-863-9382. All tips are anonymous.
Kalamazoo County Sheriff's Office has a new policy when it comes to immigration and detainment. The Sheriff's Office is making it clear that it's not an arm of U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, better known as ICE. 24-hour News 8's Brady Gillum joins us live from our Kalamazoo studio right now to walk us through this new policy. Brady?
Well, Sue, the new part of this written directive is that the Kalamazoo County Sheriff's Office will not adhere to ICE requests to detain non-citizens after they're free to leave the jail.
So the new immigration policy for the Kalamazoo County Sheriff's Office is set in place to help people understand exactly how it is we operate when it comes to immigration and detainers.
Kalamazoo County Sheriff Richard Fuller issued this new written policy yesterday. The policy's language is clear. It says the Kalamazoo County Sheriff's Office is not an enforcement arm for ICE.
It's laid out helping people understand that we're not asking people their immigration status on a traffic stop. No police agency in the state of Michigan is doing that. We're not asking people their immigration status if they're a victim of a crime or if they are a suspect in a crime.
It's the change that we needed.
Volunteer organizer Hector Rubio Garcia says he and others like him have been pressing Fuller since before last summer to issue such a policy when it comes to immigration and ICE detainers.
It's a traumatic experience for me. I mean, I haven't gone through it personally, but it definitely almost, I don't know, changes you in a way, because it's like it's unbelievable to see how inhumane the system works and how ICE doesn't give due process to our people.
But Fuller says ICE does care for people and they're just trying to do their jobs.
But at the same time, our community wanted to hear what we were going to do in those circumstances, and so we made it clear.
Now, Fuller says his department has a relatively low number of people who are in jail on an ICE hold. Reporting live in the Kalamazoo studio, Brady Gillum, 24-hour News 8.
ICE now addressing sanctuary rules after a new state attorney general tries to support illegals. The raids will continue. Jack Davis for the Western Journal reports New Jersey has announced new rules that will limit the extent to which state and local law enforcement agencies can work in partnership with federal immigration and customs enforcement officials. The Immigrant Trust Directive was announced by the Attorney General Gerber S. Grewell, according to WCAU. And Grewell criticized President Trump during his announcement, saying that current White House policies have cultivated a culture of fear that pushes the most vulnerable residents deeper into the shadows. They write here that due to that fear, crimes go unreported and people refuse to testify at trials, allowing criminals to remain on the streets. That's according to the Attorney General. The new rules will draw a bright line between federal immigration officials and local police, he said, according to NJ.com. Take a look.
All right, now on to another maddening story we're following tonight. New Jersey Attorney General Gerber Grewell just issued a new rule that will handcuff cops from arresting illegal immigrants. The new guidelines saying that New Jersey police cannot stop or detain anyone based on their immigration status. They can't ask the immigration status of anyone unless it's part of an ongoing investigation, and officers will not be able to cooperate or participate in ICE raids. This basically classifies New Jersey as a sanctuary state. Joining me now is Kim Guadagno. She's a former lieutenant governor of New Jersey. Kim, you've actually been warning of this for a long time. We had that horrific case, and I'm just going to remind everyone, put the photo up. This is Luis Rodrigo Perez, 23-year-old Mexican national, accused of killing 3 people in Missouri after being released in New Jersey on domestic violence charges and other crimes as well. He was released. ICE wasn't notified, went on to kill 3 people. Now this, Kim.
That our Attorney General here in New Jersey thinks that immigrants need more protection that they already get.
Wow. Knowing that illegal immigrants will be living in New Jersey and be out of reach, okay, they said ICE will need to step up raids, which will actually result in more collateral arrests. ICE will be notified of an illegal immigrant's pending release if the immigrant has committed murder, rape, arson, assault, or domestic violence, but New Jersey officials will not hold them past midnight of the day that they are scheduled to be released. Every government official and member of law enforcement and judge takes an oath to uphold the law and the Constitution. Sanctuary by government officials and judges is unconstitutional. It's illegal. Only citizens and legal residents are protected by the Constitution. Okay? That's it. Comment below. We'll see you at the next report. For the Next News Network, I'm Gary Franchi.
Breaking news tonight, the Associated Press reports the Border Patrol has made 32 arrests at a demonstration at the border separating San Diego from Tijuana, Mexico. Tonight we have new evidence of the lengths some migrants will go to enter the U.S. This comes as thousands of other travelers are postponing or abandoning their quest. Correspondent Steve Harrigan shows us tonight from Tijuana.
The desperation of some can only be guessed at. What would drive parents to drop small children from an 18-foot border wall, injuring one? Or to push an 8-month-old baby through a hole dug under the same wall? They've come 2,000 miles north by foot or bus, carrying everything they own. Stalled now in squalid Tijuana shelters with a months-long wait for a chance at asylum in the U.S. Record numbers have crossed illegally. Border Patrol says 51,000 were arrested in the month of November alone, an increase over the same period last year of 78%. Thousands, disgusted by the filth and the wait, have given up and gone back home. But for some, home is no longer an option.
No, I don't want to go back. It's too much threat, and they try to recruit me, the gangs.
The frustration boiled over for a few hours 2 weeks ago when migrants tried to storm the border. The temporary border shutdown proved so costly to both sides, a new camp was set up 11 miles further south. Concrete has replaced mud, and donations have somewhat improved conditions.
There's a big need for underwear because there are no washing machines here, so we were giving away underwear and socks.
Many of the migrants are finding a middle ground, staying in Tijuana, where there's a strong labor market, and trying to move out of the shelters. But patience is worn thin. The violence, though limited to one day, has hurt local business and been a drag on tourism. Pay at one of the giant factories here is about $75 a week.
And new at 6, a panel of 11 federal judges in San Francisco heard a case that could change the immigration system.
KPIX5 political reporter Melissa Kane was in the courtroom for us today. Melissa?
I certainly was, and I'm glad I got there early, too, because it was standing room only in there. The big question today, do undocumented children appearing before an immigration judge have the right to a lawyer paid for by U.S. taxpayers?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
The federal judges grilled attorneys on both sides of the case.
It would be constitutionally required to appoint counsel.
You seem to suggest that in your reply. Never. So
Scott Stewart for the government.
the difficulty is that you'd like to establish a broader principle.
Arilan Arulantham for the immigrants' rights groups.
There was obviously a lot of hard questions for us, but also a lot of hard questions for the government.
It all started in 2014.
CJ came to the United States. He was only 13 years old when he arrived at the border with his mother.
One of CJ's attorneys, Talia Inlander, says he came to the U.S. to escape gangs in Honduras.
He fled several days after being threatened by gangs at gunpoint, that if he didn't join the gang, he would have a day to decide. If he didn't join, he would be killed.
CJ and his mother crossed the border illegally, but were caught and removal proceedings began.
He appeared at every single one of his court hearings without a lawyer.
In immigration cases, people have a right to an attorney if they can pay for it, or an attorney that will work for free, but they don't have a right to a government-funded attorney. CJ's lawyers want to change that.
We want a ruling that children facing deportation are entitled to legal representation.
CJ's lawyers say the cost to taxpayers to provide an attorney to all children facing deportation would be $2,700 per case. And according to the Department of Homeland Security, in 2016 alone, over 100,000 juveniles were apprehended at the border. If all of them got lawyers, that would add up to $276 million per year. A prior ruling in this case said mandating free court-appointed counsel could further strain an overextended immigration system. Now, in California, there are government-funded resources. In this year's state budget, for example, there's $58 million to pay for lawyers to represent people in immigration proceedings. And local governments also set aside money for immigration. Counties like San Francisco and Alameda both have immigration units as part of their public defenders' offices.
All right.
All right, Melissa, thank you.
Joining me now from Washington, D.C., resident fellow in law and policy at the Center for Immigration Studies, Andrew Arthur. Andrew, speaking of the census, you folks at the Center for Immigration Studies did a fascinating look behind the numbers of the previous census, a stunning number of immigrants in this country. And I'm going to use that word immigrants, meaning both people who came here legally and illegally, I believe, but they are receiving public assistance. This would be taxpayer dollars. 63% of non-U.S. citizens are on welfare. Now that is versus 35% of U.S. citizens. This is somewhere in the neighborhood of 4.5 million households in this country. The American people ought to be outraged.
Yes, and the interesting thing is that even if you factor out the earned income tax credit, which is basically money that you get back for filing a tax return even if you haven't paid any taxes, it's still 58% of immigrant or non-citizen-headed households that are receiving welfare benefits, again, as opposed to 30% of native households. So the numbers are astounding, and quite frankly, it's a real cost to the public fisc. More importantly, it also takes jobs away from American citizens, because those individuals, the working poor who are immigrants, are actually competing directly with native-born, and by not just native-born, but also lawful residents who are already here. So it's a double whammy for the American people.
But that's my taxpayer dollars, and I don't want my taxpayer dollars going to non-U.S. citizens who are siphoning off the public dole. And we need to view this through the prism of that so-called caravan of people, illegal immigrants at the border right now. And here is why the so-called caravan needs to be repelled, and we can't let those people in. There's a headline in the Fox News right now: Honduran woman 19 and Migrant Caravan scales border wall to what? Give birth in the United States. And so we have video of situations like this, Andrew. Over and over and over again, we see people sneaking under the fencing, under the wall. They're climbing over the wall, very brazen. And in some cases, there are children involved here. And so this is what has to change here. We have to close the loopholes, because these people know that they're not going to be shot once they get on the other side, like other countries might do. And there's an argument of whether we should be arming Border Patrol with the right to fire. That's another discussion. But the bottom line is they know they're not going to be shot at. In fact, they know they might be granted asylum.
Yeah, so when you're talking about that particular woman, she gave birth in the United States. She referred to her baby as her big reward for making it into the United States. And the family was actually released by Immigration and Customs Enforcement on Sunday, shortly after she gave birth. The fact is, immigrants in detention, generally, their cases take about 40 days. Immigrants who are out of detention, on the other hand, their cases take 8 years. So Ms. Hernandez is going to be in the United States with her family for a minimum of 8 years, and quite frankly, it may be longer, because, again, that's probably not going to be the last child that she has in the United States. You know, we have a right to have children if we want. They're going to build up equities. She'll probably get a job. Her husband will get a job. They'll put the kids in school, right. And each one of those things will contribute to the equities that she has.
And we'll pay for it. Again, but that's another subject, is the 14th Amendment. It's being bastardized. It was never intended to be interpreted this way, and we must as a country come to grips with that. But you talked about the asylum cases. A record number, when they finally do get to court, if they get to court, are being rejected. There is an incredible amount of pressure on our court system right now to handle all of these cases. 1 million backlogged immigration cases, including asylum. The burden is on the courts, yeah, but the burden is also on the taxpayers here. 1 million backlogged.
Yes, and you know, the cost of the American people is tremendous. I was a former immigration judge. I was a judge for 8 years, and you know, I was amply paid for that. And I had a clerk. We had a whole court. But there were only about 300 judges at the time. Attorney General Sessions managed to boost that up. He hired 127 additional immigration judges. So hopefully we'll bring that number down. But the fact is that the number of asylum claims that are flooding the system and the number of bogus asylum claims that are flooding the system have two effects. One, they cost the American people money. Two, they drive out the ability of people with legitimate asylum claims to get their claims heard. So, I mean, this is a huge problem. It's one that that Attorney General Sessions attempted to undertake, and I hope that Acting Attorney General Whitaker and the next Attorney General follow through with what he's done, and that we start to tackle this problem.
Well, if we close the loopholes, if Congress closes the loopholes, these people won't have the incentive to try and violate our sovereignty and then claim asylum and clog up the courts. It's up to the Congress. It is, frankly, it's not even up to the President, the executive branch. It's up to the Congress. Article 1, Section 8, Paragraph 15, they need to do their jobs. Andrew, thank you.
State officials introduced a bill aiming to help border counties identify missing migrants. Congressman Vicente Gonzalez says the Missing Persons and Unidentified Remains Act of 2018 would allow families to identify a lost loved one during their journey to the U.S.
They're taken to probably a morgue somewhere where the DNA is taken and certain physiological procedures are conducted to find who they are, where they come from. Then they're put into a database. Sometimes they're carrying identification with them, sometimes they're not. And then they are given a proper burial and identified where they're being buried. And if a family member from somewhere around the world sends in their DNA or their information after having had a missing family member, they're able to bring closure to the idea that they've actually lost a family member and we know where they are.
If the bill is approved, an additional 6 cellular beacons would be funded, allowing migrants to call 911 for help. A young local woman arrested for attempting to smuggle in close to $200,000 worth of cocaine. It happened at the Hidalgo International Bridge. Customs and Border Protection officers tell us the narcotics were hidden inside of her vehicle. It was driven by a 22-year-old woman from Hidalgo. A canine alerted to the 9 packages of cocaine. The case was turned over to Homeland Security investigations. An update on the historic church in jeopardy because of the proposed border wall. Bishop Daniel Flores tells us he's hopeful for a good outcome in the courts. You may recall the federal government is in the process of obtaining land for the creation of the border wall, with construction in that area expected as early as 2019. Right now, the Catholic Diocese in Brownsville disputing the 2 properties in Hidalgo County that would be affected. Local 23 News spoke with the local bishop on the church's federal court filings.
The request was made for something that belongs to the church in terms of property, and so within the court system, we're just trying to address the fact that we would like to protect our interests under the First Amendment to exercise freedom of religion.
La Lomita Chapel is one of many sites along the border that may forever change with the proposed border wall. Other sites facing similar land distribution problems include Benson State Park and the National Butterfly Center.
32 people arrested today at the U.S.-Mexico border near Friendship Park. Border Patrol tells 10 News one agent was assaulted. 10 News reporter Travis Rice shows what some considered a peaceful protest was quickly deemed unlawful.
All you really hear are the sounds of the helicopters.
There are a lot of eyes on the border,
which I think gives a very eerie sense.
Especially now. Hundreds of activists marched through Friendship Park and Borderfield State Park, making their case why the U.S. should demilitarize the border and let all the migrants in.
Let us give them the resources that they need, but we don't need military, we need judges. We need judges listening to the cases.
Not approach the agents. Organizers called it a peaceful protest.
Back off! Back off!
There was a warning. They said if you come back down and come through again, you will be arrested.
Any violation of federal regulations is an arrestable offense.
A couple hundred people show up to do a peaceful protest. At least that's what it seemed like for the most part. However, we did have people trespass on the federal property, encroach on the federal property, so we had to make a few arrests.
Border Patrol says their agents handled it professionally.
I do want to highlight to people the issue here is exactly what we've said before. As my agents are looking north, trying to deal with this protest, they started taking rocks from the south side.
Today proving it's a tough situation on both sides.
It's unfortunate, but that's the dynamic we live in, is we're trying to put our attention in 2 directions, to be quite honest.
Travis Rice, 10 News.